All right, let's talk about types of unemployment. There are three types of unemployment that we're going to be considering for the purposes of this course. They're frictional unemployment, structural unemployment, and cyclical unemployment. Frictional unemployment is actually regarded as somewhat desirable because it indicates that people have the freedom and mobility to change jobs, because frictional unemployment is represented by people who are moving from one job to another, either within a company or at a different company, but they're basically moving from one place to another and doing about the same job. They have what we call transferable skills that can be taken from one job and applied to another with little or no retraining. So when we have frictional unemployment in the economy, it indicates that we've got some mobility. There are jobs out there and people are able to do that. Structural unemployment, on the other hand, is unemployment that occurs because of what we call structural changes in the economy. These structural changes tend to eliminate some jobs and create others for which the unemployed are not qualified, unfortunately. So this is associated with something we call non-transferable skills. These workers have skills that they can't easily transfer to another job. They're going to need some sort of retraining. Structural unemployment can result from technology changes. An example would be if robotics takes the place of actual people on the production line, then those folks aren't simply going to be able to go work on another production line because everybody's going to be using that technology. So they're going to need some retraining and actually find something completely different to do, probably. Cyclical unemployment is the unemployment that's caused by a downturn in the economy. So what happens is when the economy starts to get bad, people tend to spend less money, and so as firms respond to that lower spending, to that insufficient demand for their goods and services, then they cut back as well. So they stop producing as much and they start to lay people off. And that, when they start to lay people off in response to a decrease in spending, that's going to be our cyclical unemployment. The extreme unemployment that we saw during the Great Depression, we reached 25% in 1933, was cyclical unemployment. Okay. So how do we calculate cyclical unemployment? Cyclical unemployment is calculated as the actual unemployment rate minus frictional and structural unemployment. So if the actual unemployment rate is 8%, frictional unemployment is 3%, structural unemployment is 2%, then our cyclical unemployment rate would be the difference, it would be 3%. So that's the employment over and above frictional and structural unemployment. The reason we look at it that way is because you can have both frictional and structural unemployment when the economy is growing. They both exist. And in fact, as we said, we tend to think of frictional unemployment as the sign of a healthy economy. And structural unemployment, again, usually as a result of positive technological change. It hurts for the folks who are laid off, but looking at the overall economy, it's generally a positive sign. So those both occur even when the economy is strong and growing. So what does it mean if we say that we have full employment? Well, let me tell you what it doesn't mean. It does not mean that the unemployment rate is zero. Okay? When we say that the economy is operating at full employment, what we're saying is that we're operating at something called the natural unemployment rate. The natural unemployment rate is equal to the frictional unemployment rate plus the structural unemployment rate. So at the natural unemployment rate, theoretically, the number of job seekers is equal to the number of job vacancies. Now, this doesn't mean that all the job seekers are necessarily qualified for the job vacancies without retraining. That's our structural unemployment. Or that they're going to immediately be matched up with a job vacancy for which they're already qualified. That's our frictional unemployment. But it means that the labor markets are kind of in a sort of balance. Now, the natural rate of unemployment is not fixed, but rather it depends on the demographic makeup of the labor force and the laws and customs of the nation. There was some discussion following this last recession about had the natural unemployment rate changed. It was taking us so long for the unemployment rate to fall. There was some discussion of whether the natural unemployment had actually increased. Some of that discussion is still going on, but prior to that, we had seen a general feeling that the natural unemployment rate had dropped. It had been about 6%, and most economists were agreeing it had maybe dropped to somewhere in the 4 to 5% range. And we attributed this to the aging of the workforce. We had baby boomers approaching retirement. We also had improved job information through the internet and temporary help agencies, so that lowers our frictional unemployment. We also had new work requirements passed with welfare reform. And we also had the doubling of the U.S. prison population since 1985. So the natural unemployment rate does fluctuate. It kind of moves around with what's going on in terms of the economy and also the demographics. So it's not a set number that never changes. We do have some flex there in terms of that natural unemployment rate.